Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. I'm Juliette Beauchamp. On my last video about the Huawei ban, I got a lot of really great questions from you guys, so I wanted to take some time today to go through them. I read all the government documents, I read all the articles, so you don't have to. Stick around. It was awesome to see that all of you guys had such great feedback and such really good questions. I know it's really confusing and it seems like it changes daily. And even since we posted that video, a lot has changed. So I'm gonna go through some of your questions as well as some other sort of confusing points. A lot of what's going on between the US and the ban on business transactions with Huawei has to do with these alleged security concerns. So because Huawei is a Chinese tech company, the US government alleges that it is sort of at the will of the Chinese government, and if the Chinese government ever ordered Huawei to spy on users, it would have to comply with such. So that's why, for a while, Huawei hasn't been allowed in US government agencies. Think US executive agencies like the Department of Defense or the State Department. But now this ban is much more broad-reaching. It reaches virtually everyone in the United States as well as a lot of people throughout the world. Because the Huawei ban has to do with US businesses not being able to work with Huawei. So that means businesses like Google, which supplies Android, Microsoft, which supplies Windows, as well as a lot of chip makers. So that's all we know that's going on right now so far. I'm pretty sure I didn't miss anything, but if there's anything big that stands out to you, let me know in the comments. Like I said, I love hearing from you guys. So now let's get into some of your more specific questions. A lot of you asked, should I buy XYZ phone? And I've responded to some of you, but here's my sort of general answer. Whether or not you should buy a Huawei phone right now really depends on where in the world you live. If you live in the US, it is going to be probably pretty difficult to get a Huawei phone, and you're probably not going to be able to use it very well. That being said, if you're in some of the other Huawei markets, like in Asia, like in Europe, it's not necessarily a bad idea to buy a Huawei phone. People love Huawei phones, they're great phones, but whether or not you should buy a specific phone is also up to your preference on whether or not you want full-fat Android. So if having access to full-fat Android is something that's really, really important to you, just make sure you buy one of the Huawei phones that were released before this ban started. That's the P30, the Mate 20, P20, Mate 10, P10. We'll have a list of these. And those will have, as of right now, access to all of the Android apps that you love, security updates, and so on. But if you're looking for a new Huawei phone, like the Mate 30, that is not going to have Android. It's going to have sort of Huawei's bare bones version of Android, which is still a fine operating system, but if you are dying to have something like the Google Play Store, the Gmail app, probably not for you. So we also got another great question from user Wicked Howl. They asked if the ban applied to Honor phones. Because that's sort of a Huawei brand, yes, it does apply to Honor phones. So like I said, any older Honor phones will currently have Android, will get security updates. Any new ones will not, will have that open source version of Android. And actually this ban applies to more than just Huawei. It's really Chinese tech companies as a whole. Another big one is ZTE. Huawei is just sort of the most notable company. That's why it's sort of been called the Huawei ban. So in a similar vein about whether or not you guys should buy whatever Huawei phone is whether or not you should buy any Huawei laptop. Some good news here is that Microsoft was actually one of the companies granted a license to work with Huawei. So the Commerce Department made all of the companies that want to work with Huawei apply for a license. We know for a fact Microsoft got one. We don't necessarily know what the specifications of that license are, but it's probably likely that Microsoft will be able to supply Huawei with Windows. So even though we know that Microsoft was granted a license, we don't know whether or not Google was granted a license. So that's why I'm saying be cautious about phones, but laptops, you're probably in the clear. On November 19th, that's when another temporary reprieve was supposed to end. The Commerce Department, the US government, granted another temporary reprieve that's now supposed to go through February 2020. So that's when the US companies can continue to work with Huawei to either sort of phase out their use or continue to deliver security updates. Another big thing that happened is that the FCC here in the US, the Federal Communications Commission, barred telecom companies from using Huawei in their networks. This has been sort of a general consensus. We all kind of knew that this was coming. And this really only applies to the small rural telecoms in the US. The big carriers, think Sprint, T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, they probably didn't have that much Huawei equipment to begin with just because of this sort of contentious relationship between the US and Huawei. But now it's set in stone, it's official. Any rural telecom company that relies on the FCC for funds is not allowed to use Huawei equipment. There's no word yet, though, on whether or not the US government is going to subsidize this whole rip and replace effort. Obviously, these rural telecom companies aren't as huge. They don't have as much money as the big telcos like Verizon. So it is going to be a pretty costly endeavor. There was some speculation, some mumbling in Congress about giving these rural telecom companies, I think, $700 million. Let me know if you've heard something different, or if you've heard that has since gone into effect. I couldn't find anything, but we could hear more about this soon because now this is set in stone. It is law. You have to rip it out and replace it if you are using Huawei. Huawei has pretty cheap equipment, which is why it was so appealing for rural telecom companies to use. But now that they're not allowed to, there needs to be some sort of solution. I will keep you updated if we find out more about that. I am sure we're going to hear more, especially into 2020, when a lot of 5G phones are supposed to come out. The goal is by 2022 for China to completely replace any foreign-made hardware or software. So that's phones, laptops, computers, all cannot be foreign made. Now, this could be just sort of another move in the ongoing US-China trade war. I honestly couldn't tell you whether or not this is going to change, but as more negotiations continue to happen, we might hear something new. Before I let you guys go, I do have one more big piece of news, and it's that China is trying to replace all foreign hardware and software by the end of 2022, allegedly. So the goal over the next 3 years is to try and replace any hardware, any software, so that means phones, that means computers, that are foreign made. This could be just sort of a jab at the US because of the ongoing trade war. It could be negotiated away. It's kind of hard to tell right now, but I will absolutely keep you guys updated. Thank you all for watching this video. Like I said at the beginning, I really love seeing your questions, your comments, your opinions. So if you have any, be sure to leave them down below. If you have any specific questions, I will try my best to get back to them either in the comments or in another video. And as always, I love seeing your thoughts about the ban. You guys have some really interesting opinions, so be sure to leave those below as well. Thanks again for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you next time.